Today is all about how to gather fabric, and we're starting right now. Hey guys, it's Elizabeth from ElizabethMavis.com, helping you sell something creative. If that's up your alley, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything. So today I wanted to extend a post that I was thinking about last week on Elizabeth Mavis, talking about cheap sewing tools that are just really useful, stuff that's around your house. And one of them that I wrote about was dental floss. What do you use dental floss for? To gather fabric, of course. So dental floss is actually a really, really awesome tool when it comes to gathering fabric. So I'm going to show you not only how to use dental floss to gather some fabric, but I'm also going to show you how to gather fabric with elastic, which is really great for things like knits, and also how to gather fabric with elastic thread, which is actually slightly different. You wouldn't think so, right? That they're kind of different, but they are. And also the classic technique of using 3 rows of basting stitches. We're going to talk about that. And then I have a weird one, which is actually kind of just super fun, but also kind of high risk, which is how to gather with your serger. So we're going to go through all of those techniques, and you can pick which one you like the best. Why do we want to gather in the first place? So gathering fabric is one of those basic techniques that we do that creates shape in our garments. It's anytime that we're going to take a larger piece of fabric and shrink it down so that it fits into a smaller piece. So what does that create? It gives a little bit of value. So if you're like me, pear shape here, and you need a little bit more room in your hips, that gathering. Let's just pretend this guy is an A-line skirt, right? So my little skirt here is going to fit at my waist, right? But all of this, because there's more fabric here, is just going to kind of fall over my hips. So it's a really simple way to get some extra room without having to sew things like darts or princess seams or some of those other more complicated techniques. In fact, a gathered skirt is one of those, it might be one of the very first skirts that you ever learn how to sew. So gathering is just a useful thing. You'll see it not only on skirts but also on side seams, like on this Tracy Reese dress that I have on right now. I've got some side ruching which is done with elastic. That's just straight up the side seam. You also see it sometimes on shoulders, lots of different places, on sleeve caps, all kinds of different places where you can use gathering. Let's get into how to gather fabric, these different 5 ways, and I will see you on the other side. So what fabrics are best for gathering fabric? So here I've got some cotton voile. You can see the gathers just kind of sit nice and soft and pretty because that cotton voile is nice and lightweight. As I get with thicker fabric with this cotton flannel, you can see things get kind of a little bit more architectural, and the folds are starting to sit a little bit thicker on that fabric. And then if I move to a super thick, heavy cotton twill like this is, you can see that little sample almost stands on its own. So definitely go for lighter weight fabrics when you go to gather fabric. So now I've got my cotton voile here, and I am just going to gather with basting. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set my machine to a really long straight stitch, as long as your machine goes. Mine goes through 5 millimeters, but yours might be different. So I'm going to just really quickly sew one row in my seam allowance, just straight down that edge. When I get to the end, I'm going to just cut off the threads. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail so I can work with that later. You can see I'm using contrast thread. I use contrast thread because it's easier to take out later. You don't have to take out your basting threads, but I like to because I think it's cleaner, but that's a personal preference. You can always just leave them in there, and that's fine too. So I just did another row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the first one that I did, and now I'm going to do a third row. This third row is going to give us some extra control when we go to gather the stitches in a second. So the other reason why I used a contrast thread is so that you can see that I'm going to go grab the bobbin threads on the other side. So my bobbin thread is a lighter color. So now I'm going to separate out the bobbin threads only, and I'm just going to use that with the tip of my embroidery scissors, just so I can kind of grab hold of those guys. And I'm going to grab onto them and just start to pull on the threads. And then all 3 of those threads at the same time are going to start to gather the fabric. You can see how it's kind of bunching up together. And I think it's always easier to gather the threads as far as they can all together before you start adjusting all of the gathers and moving them around from each other. So I'm just going to do that on both sides of it. Again, I'm going to grab those bobbin threads from the other side. This is just a really small sample. You're probably using this. I love this method on really short sections of gathered fabric. I think it does a really nice job for short sections. If you're doing a long flounce, not so much. So now I have my sample. It's all nice. I gathered everything, and I'm just going to use my fingers to kind of pull out the gathers a little bit and kind of adjust them, make sure that they're even and looking kind of nice now. And now let's pretend that we're going to put this into a waistband now. So I just took this little scrap of fabric. We're going to pretend it's a waistband, and I'm just going to pin it into place with my faux waistband here. I'm going to keep the gathers up on the top, and I'm going to make sure that all of those gathered edges are right along that edge. So now let's talk gathering with elastic. So here I've got some clear elastic. I tend to use elastic that I buy by the yard, and I'm going to use a ballpoint needle. That's really important because needles can shred your elastic, so make sure you're using a ballpoint needle. I've also got a little scrap of fabric, and I've just set my machine to a zigzag stitch. I'm just going to stitch a couple of stitches here, and then I'm going to lift my presser foot, and then I'm going to grab my clear elastic and just kind of put it right under my presser foot, and make sure that that is just sitting right on that fabric. The reason why I'm doing this is that the elastic tends to get sucked down into the presser foot, and then it's just kind of a mess. So if you do it this way, you will never have that problem with the elastic. So now my elastic is anchored, and I'm going to put it on the wrong side of my knit fabric here. And this technique is great for knit fabrics. This is what you'll see when you if you have that ruche side seam that I showed earlier in the example. So the trick here is that I'm going to stitch, but I'm going to pull on the elastic only while I'm stitching with that zigzag stitch straight down there. And it's not a bad idea to kind of lengthen your stitch a little bit, and you'll see it just kind of gathers on its own. It's kind of magic. The trick here is that you're just applying even pulling all the way along on your stitching. You can see, oh, beautiful gathers. They're going to hold. You don't take this out. It's just perfect just the way it is. So just clip your threads and clip the elastic, and you're good to go. Oh, also clip it off of your your little thread starter there too. Okay, so slightly different now. I've got a piece of cotton lawn that is embroidered. I've got some elastic thread, and now I'm going to gather with elastic. This is slightly different than the previous example. So now I've got this elastic thread. I'm going to anchor my needle down into my fabric, and then I'm going to put my presser foot down, and now I'm just going to zigzag over the elastic thread. So we don't want to catch the elastic inside of the stitching at all. We're just stitching over that elastic only. The cool thing about this is when I go to snip my threads, and I'm going to snip my elastic thread, just leave a little bit of a tail on it, and I'm just going to pull on the elastic, and it's just going to gather kind of magically all by itself. So I'm just going to pull on that. I really like this. This makes for really soft gathers. And then when you go to sew it into your thing, you can take out your elastic, or you can leave it in there. It's a personal preference. You see, it just makes really nice, beautiful, soft, even gathers that just kind of feel nice. So just use your hands to kind of adjust them. This method is really kind of great because it just kind of makes the gathers even kind of right out of the gate without too much work on your part. So that is how you gather with elastic thread. Pretty cool, yeah? So if there's a fan favorite way to gather fabric, it is gathering with floss. So I've got some dental floss. Hey, I am going to just lay it straight over my fabric, and I'm going to use that same zigzag stitch, but this is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to anchor my needle down in the fabric and then put the presser foot down, and now I am just going to stitch with my zigzag stitch, and I am just going to stitch right over the dental floss. Again, I want to make sure that I don't hit it with my stitching, and then I'm just stitching right over the top of that. So the cool thing about dental floss is that it's really, really strong. So unlike some of the other methods, it's really difficult to break the thread. And we're just going to go all the way down to the end of the seam and just stitch in over my zigzag, over with my floss. One of those weird tools that you didn't know was going to be useful. Okay, so now I'm getting to the end and I'm just going to clip my thread, but I am not going to clip my dental floss. I'm going to give it a little bit of a tail. And now I'm going to grab the ends of the dental floss and just kind of like with the elastic, I am going to pull on those and just pull it from one side and pull it from the other. Again, this is going to make for nice, really, really even gathers. And the dental floss, because it's waxed, it tends to hold the gathers really, really well too. So that is also another huge benefit to using the floss. It also makes kind of, I like it for these kind of cotton fabrics because it makes for nice little crispy pleats, micro pleats in all of your gathering. So really, I think it's a beautiful little thing. A little bit different than the elastic thread, but kind of similar at least in the sewing part. And then just go ahead and adjust those. Make sure they look nice. Pretty easy. It's really fast too. It's a great method, and plus it's, hey, you're using dental floss, right? It's super novel, so that's pretty fun. So you can see, and the one thing I will say is that you want to make sure that you're holding on to the ends of your floss, because you can see they kind of tend to pull out of everything. So again, just use your fingers to move everything around and make sure that everything just looks nice. So now let's talk how to gather with a serger. So when you do that, you want to raise your needle thread's tension to a higher number and then raise your differential feed too. And then from there, you just serge on the edge. It's going to make for a really ugly serger stitch, but it's going to make for a really easy way to gather thread. You see what's happening. This is a silk cotton ball, so this is a perfect weight of fabric to use for this particular technique. This is kind of a high-risk technique because the threads tend to break. If they do break on you, and this totally does in the course of me gathering this as I'm talking here, then just go ahead and pull the needle threads again right where it broke on each side of the break. So I'm separating out those needle threads, and you can see I changed those so that they're really easy to see to a red thread. But if you can't tell what the needle threads are, they're the ones that make the two parallel stitches along your stitching on your serger. So I'm just pulling on those, and I'm just going to again just gather along those stitches. Because we've messed up the tension on there, it makes it a lot easier to gather those threads. So just very carefully, just go to gather the threads. This is just a different kind of way to go about it. It's really fast because you're serging, which is much faster than your sewing machine. So that's kind of fun and different. And I also like it because it's right on the edge, so there's almost no chance of you having to remove your stitches later. So that's nice because it'll save you time in the end. But just be careful, just be patient as you go to gather all those edges together, because like I said, these threads will break. The needle threads will definitely break. They're under high tension, and serger thread is also not as strong as regular sewing thread. So just watch out for that and be mindful of that. And as long as you're paying attention, you'll have no problem with this particular technique. And again, like I said, if you do break it, don't worry about it. Just find where the break is in the thread and gather it up on either side of that. Gather up the needle threads on either side of your break, and then you still should be able to gather your fabric just the same way. So here's my finished little sample. I didn't actually go and gather the threads like I should have in there, but you can see it just makes a nice soft kind of gather. Really simple. Go ahead and adjust the gathers with your fingers just like you've done for all of the other samples, and you're good to go. Okay, so let's go another step and pretend that we're sewing in the gathers. So here I have my fake waistband here, and I have quartered it. So I folded it in half and folded it in half again, and then marked it with a little fabric marker. And I did the same thing with my gathered piece of fabric as well. So now I'm just going to pin those markings together. So I'm matching each quarter point with the quarter point on the gathered fabric. And you're going to see that I've gathered it far too much, and that's okay because you're always going to have to adjust your gathers no matter what. So I'm just adjusting it, making sure that those ends are going to match, and I'm going to add a pin in. And how we're going to sew it in the end is going to just kind of make it all work in the end anyway. So just don't worry if your gathers are a little funky right now. We're just going to fix it as we go along, and just with a light fingers, just carefully adjust those things. We don't want to yank on anything because it's going to leave a big gap in our gathering, and then we're going to get weird chunky bits which aren't going to look too cute. So just use little pinchy fingers. And I'm going to go ahead and grab all of those, just adjust them. Use my little pinchy fingers to just adjust everything so it looks really nice. And then I'm going to grab another pin and just keep on going with my quarter matching. This is one of the few times that I do actually advocate using pins. If you know anything about me, you know I am not a fan of using pins in general, but this is one time that I think they're super helpful, just to be able to anchor everything down and make sure that it's absolutely in the right spot. So I'm just readjusting my gathers again, and then I'm going to grab my pin and pin it in place just like we've been doing. And then I'm going to grab that last little bit. Again, I'm still just making sure, using those light fingers to just adjust everything. And I'm going to grab my last one and adjust that. I'm going to pull on that on that end of the dental floss too at the end too, just so that we don't have a weird patchy bit with the gathers. So I'm just holding on to that dental floss in my finger so that the gathers are still hanging out all the way across that little section of fabric. So now when we go to sew it, we're going to sew with the gathered side up. So here I'm at my machine, and I'm with that first bit of cotton voile, and I'm just going to remove my pin and just sew straight down that side. Now I'm using a small seam allowance here. I'm only using 3/8 of an inch. That's my personal preference. If you don't want to have to remove your stitches later, go ahead and sew with a wider seam allowance. I personally like to remove all of my basting stitches, but it's not totally necessary. So I'm just clipping my thread. If I pull that over, you can see that all of my gathers are nicely sewn in, and now I've got all these basting threads that I got to get rid of. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of those. Again, if you don't want to do this step, then just sew it with a wider seam allowance. I'm fussy like this. So I am going to just get rid of all those guys. Oh, ta-da, it's looking much better. That is one of the reasons why I use contrast thread, so that I can see exactly where those basting threads are exactly. And it's really common for them to get caught in the seam. Just be patient, and if you want to take them out, you just go ahead and take them out. So now I've got my second bit that we've gathered with a dental floss, and you can see I've got that big kind of gap where it's the waistband is hanging out. So instead I'm going to just sew with the gathered side up. This is going to make sure that I don't have any holes in my gathers. It's really easy for those gathered edges to kind of creep away from the edge of the fabric, and then you have holes in your little gathering, which is not so cute. So I anchored my needle, get rid of that first pin. I'm going to hold on to my dental floss here to make sure that gathered edge is just starts being anchored in there, and I'm just going to stitch. Again, I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you don't want to remove those stitches later, you just go ahead and make yourself a wider seam allowance, and that is totally fine. I'm just stitching, and you can see I'm kind of holding onto the fabric and kind of curving it towards the needle, and that is going to make sure that we kind of ease that bottom layer, which is right now a little bit longer than our gathered edges. It's going to ease those two bits together so that we have a smooth waistband, but we still keep those beautiful gathers that we work so hard with our dental floss to make. I am just readjusting that, and I'm going to grab onto that second end of my dental floss. And again, I'm just curving the whole bit right towards the needle. I'm going to clip my thread. At this point, I can get rid of my dental floss. You definitely always want to take the dental floss out. It has served its purpose, and you don't need it anymore. I mean, that is, unless you just want to make a skirt and you want to go for a night on the town and eat some corn on the cob or something like that, and you want to, have some floss for later. I mean, who knows, right? Just kidding. Just get rid of that floss. So just pull it right out of the seam. It should be getting out right, nice and easy. And again, I'm going to take that extra step and just remove those extra little zigzag stitches that we can see there. Again, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. I'm super fussy like that, so I'm going to just go ahead and do that. I'm going to do that. And that's okay. So I'm starting on the bobbin side of that, just so I can remove that little big zigzag stitch there. Again, not necessary. If you don't want to skip that step, just go ahead and sew this seam with a wider seam allowance, and then you won't have to worry about it. Just leave that stitch in there and just zip out your dental floss, and you'll be good to go. So I'm getting down to the end, and I've just got a few little stragglers here, so I will fuss those out, and that is the finished product. See, we got a nice, beautiful gathered waistband on our dental floss sample there, and the same thing for our little cotton voile. So that is how you sew in gathers into your fabric. So what did you think? Which is your favorite way to gather fabric, do you think? I have to say that I am kind of in between the elastic thread and using the dental floss. I think the dental floss is kind of novel, but I really love how soft the gathers feel with the elastic thread. You might have different opinions. To be really honest, I use all of these techniques just depending on which one I'm in the mood for and which one seems to fit that particular fabric. Sometimes we explore options so that we can just, have something else in your pocket, different flavor, kind of thing. I have written more about the different times that I use these specific techniques with different fabrics on ElizabethMathis.com. I'm giving you the times that I think that gathering with dental floss is good and why it's bad, the upsides of each one of these techniques. So if you want to read more about that so you can learn a little bit more in depth, definitely go check out that blog post. I will link it in the description box below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends, and I'll see you in another video. Bye. Hey guys, I hope you had a good time learning how to gather fabric. There's lots of other cool stuff here on Elizabeth Mathis, so go check it out, and I'll see you next time. Bye.